Good morning, church. A happy Mother's Day to all the beautiful mothers out there. I hope you have a wonderful day. My topic today is a mother called by God. This being Mother's Day, it's an opportune time to look into this. I'll be looking at Mary in particular. I'm going to firstly recap on what Pastor spoke about last week and what our responses should be when we are called by God. Number 1 is give God our attention. Number 2, give God honor. Number 3, give God our weaknesses. And number 4, give God our surrender. These are all pertinent points that can be seen also when Mary was called. In Luke chapter 1, Mary heard from God. God had sent an angel to Mary to give her the message that she will conceive in her womb and bring forth a son who will be great and be called the Son of God. This is in Luke 1, verse 26 to 33. Mary's response to the angel was at first disbelief. She couldn't believe it because she was a virgin and had not been with the man. So how can she possibly get pregnant? The angel then proceeded to explain to her how it will happen. This is in verse 35. And in verse 36, he informs her that her relative Elizabeth has also conceived a son in her old age, proving to her that it's possible. And in that verse 37, the angel concludes by saying, "For with God, nothing will be impossible." The angel then stops speaking, and Mary responds by saying in verse 38, "Behold, the maidservants of the Lord, let it be according to your word." And the angel then departed. So in summary, what happened was the following. Number 1, Mary received a message from the Lord via the angel. She gave her attention to what the angel was saying. Number 2, Mary was in disbelief because it did not seem possible in the natural. So we can see this as a weakness for her. Number 3, the angel had to convince her by firstly explaining how it will happen and then proving to her that it's possible by letting her know that her relative Elizabeth was also pregnant in her old age. And number 4, only after Mary heard this did she believe and stated, "Behold, the maidservant of the Lord." In this, she's giving honor to God. And she then said, "Let it be according to your word." Meaning, I interpret this as her surrendering to God. Mary was a mother called by God. She was chosen to mother the Son of God. That could not have been easy to believe, as I'm sure many of us would not believe and carry out if we were given that message. But it did not take much for her to believe if we look at the scripture in Luke. How many of us have actually heard a call from God and believed it's true and that it will happen? You may have heard it from someone who has been praying for you and gave you the message, or there may be a tugging on your heart, giving you a certain desire that you know could only be from God. Or you could have heard an audible voice from God speaking to you, letting you know that this is your calling. For me personally, when I first gave my life to the Lord at the age of 14, my desire was always to worship. I love to worship, whether in dance or song or any way possible. All I wanted to do was worship. And it still has not changed. I remember going to a young adults camp at African Enterprise, and at one of the sessions, the speaker told me that I'm a worshiper. I did not believe at that time that that was my calling, and I did not think much of it. But in my early 20s, I had this vision, or it could have been a dream, of starting a Christian school of arts with the aim of bringing up worshippers by training them in an art set that they'll be able to use to worship the Lord. This has been a strong desire of mine for many years now, and I never thought it will be possible until this year only. It therefore took me over 10 years to believe that this may be my calling and that God will make it possible. Do you believe that nothing is impossible with God? We say it all the time, but do we really believe it? The last thing the angel said to Mary in verse 37 is, "For with God nothing will be impossible." In Matthew 19 verse 26, it says, Jesus looked at them and said to them, "With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." There's so much proof in Scripture of God making the impossible possible. We serve a miracle working God, and we need to trust in Him and believe that He does make the impossible possible. He has called us, each of us, and He will open the right doors, and He will enable us to complete the calling as He did with Moses and countless other servants with God. Now, as a mother, we sometimes give the excuse that we don't have time to follow a calling because we have to look after our children, we have to look after the house, we have jobs, there's no time. Well, maybe our calling could be just that. Maybe some of us are called to raise up children to be mighty men and women of God, as was Mary's calling. God really meant for you to be a mother. Motherhood, like marriage, was God's idea first, not ours. With Eve as the first woman, God instituted the calling of motherhood as an active, worshipful, missional way of life, of living. In Genesis, it clearly states that before motherhood is about children, motherhood is about God. That's why motherhood is not selective of a few women. Instead, as stated by a woman called Gloria Furman, motherhood is a calling for all women. Every Christian woman is called to the spiritual motherhood of making disciples of all nations. Wow. God's design for all mothers is to make much of Him being God, to the children entrusted to them. A mother's mission begins and ends with the gospel. I'm sure many of us mothers pray all the time for our children and for our families. And that in itself is contributing to what God has called us to do in raising our children. So besides our children, even in our workplace, our calling could be to affect someone's life positively. Some of us are intercessors. It's something you've been doing and need to continue doing and trying to grow, educating yourself and allowing God to lead you in this area. That's just one example of one of our callings. Each calling is different, but if we obey the calling, it will make the impact God has intended it to make. For mothers, I'd like to end with reading Psalms 31 verse 30, which says, "Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised." Ladies, I'd like to encourage you to fear, revere, and honor the Lord. He loves you, but He needs to be honored. And as you do that, He will lift you up. Thank you, and have a blessed Mother's Day.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Mother's Day to all our beautiful mothers that have joined us for the service. I hope you are blessed. I hope you've enjoyed it thus far. Today we're going to be talking about called to worship. We have started a series of Called by God, and today we're going to focus on being called to worship. In John chapter 4, verse 21 to 24, it says, Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and His worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth." Now, our view, many of us at least, our view is that worship is when somebody picks up a guitar or plays a piano or there's a band or creates music of some sort and we start to sing to the Lord and we consider that music. So we say on our playlists, at least we consider that worship. So we have playlists on our phone. We'll have a playlist of hip hop. We'll have contemporary. I also do that. And then we have a playlist of worship. And it's as if worship is a genre, and it's not a genre. Worship does not start when the music starts. Stephen Furtick was speaking, and he was talking about worship, and he said that worship can be said worship. And I thought that was quite profound because when we worship, we're worshiping who? We're worshiping the person who we give our worth to, who is worthy of our attention. And everybody worships something. And we're hoping that our ultimate person that we worship will be God, Jesus Christ. Worship is not there to stimulate our emotions. Many times we may be in church and we listen, and when the key goes funny, when people are talking, singing off key, then we get distracted, or we don't like the way so and so is dressed, or whatever the case is. And it's all about how it makes us feel. And I admire Herschel. Herschel is a person who, whether he dislikes a song, and there are songs that he dislikes, and songs that we will sing in church that he's not really a fan of, or keys off key, or whatever the case is, you would never say that he dislikes something, because when he worships, he gives it his all. He worships with the words of the song. Never mind whether his personal feelings for that song is not in, or at least they're playing a song that he's not really a fan of. When we look at concerts, like you get these Justin Bieber concerts, all the Beliebers, and many famous people have these concerts, and all these people go to the concerts. And when I was years ago, I used to watch these Michael Jackson concerts, and I used to be so fascinated by all these people that would be totally fixated on Michael Jackson. Their whole focus, they would cry. Actually, they would bawl. You'll see them going, ah. And I couldn't believe that people would cry like that. And they'll say, I love you, Michael. Oh my God. And then some of them would faint. And then all this, the ushers or whatever you call them, the security would come and they would pick them up over the people to get these fainters out of the way. And it's an absolute, I don't even know what the word. It's just a wonder to me. What happens? They actually are worshiping Michael Jackson. They're worshiping a man that will never do anything for them. He will never be able to comfort them. He will never be able to listen to them when they need to talk. He will never be able to provide for their needs. But yet they're totally fixated on this person. We light up as people also for sports teams, whether it's soccer, or rugby, or cricket, or whatever the case is. We get all excited, or we get revved up when the ref is doing the wrong thing, when our president says something we don't want, or other presidents say something. We've got a lot to say. And yet sometimes when it comes to worshiping the one who created us, the one who gave us life, we are there as if we don't have life. We get bored, we get tired, we feel like it's a waste of time. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but a lot of people, it's like taking up time, let's just get on with this so we can do it. And that shouldn't be the case. So what is worship? I want to look at the definition, and it says it is a feeling or an expression of reverence and adoration. This is the type of feeling or expression we want to give to this God who created us, this God who gave us life, reverence and adoration. Someone said it is the activity of glorifying God in His presence with our voices and our hearts. So not necessarily with singing, and not necessarily using our voices only for singing. We can worship God just with our voices without singing. It is a direct expression of our ultimate purpose for living. We are here because of the God that we serve. We are here because we were created to worship Him. It is an outward expression of our inward belief. So we believe that He is the Lord. We believe that He is the way, the truth, and the life. We believe that He is the God of all creation and that He deserves all our glory. And well, at least he deserves all the glory, and we express this with our worship. It is a command that we must worship the Lord, but most of all, we do it because it's an honor and because it's a privilege. What an amazing thing it is to worship God. It's much more than singing, as I've said. Everything that we do in our lives should be an act of worship. I always look at the sky. I look at creation. When we travel, I look at the scenery and the surroundings and the mountains and the hills and the rocks, the way they're shaped, and the grass and the stars in the sky at night and the clouds and the form of clouds and the sunrise and the sunsets. And I always am so fascinated by the beauty of creation. And I look at creation and I say, how could anybody not believe that there's a God when you look at these amazing and fascinating things about creation? Also, when we look at babies and how they formed in the mother's tummy, at least the womb, and they develop inside of there and they're swimming around in the mummy's tummy and they come out and they start growing. And I think it's the most fascinating thing. And I see our amazing God when I look at babies, when I look at creation, when I look at my children, when I look at things around me. I just glorify God because he is just amazing when we look at that. And sometimes the greatest times of worship is with no song at all. In Exodus 7, Herschel had spoken about Moses last week, and then Pharaoh had demanded for Moses to go, well, at least God had asked Moses to go to Pharaoh and demand for him to let the people go. Let his people go so they may go and worship him. And where were they going to worship? They were going to worship corporately in the desert. So I just want to touch on that there is a place for corporate worship. Like we have a church, like we have worship services together, it's definitely needed, and it definitely teaches us and it stimulates us, and it sometimes releases us from the burdens that we've been carrying around. Sometimes we really have gone through the week, or things in the family are not so good, or things at work, and there's just a release when we are surrounded by other people and we worship together. When we see other people raising their hands, it motivates us to do that, and as we release it, it brings freedom to us in certain things. We also could be so heavy and discouraged, like I said, and down, and worshiping corporately definitely encourages us to look beyond how we feel. I remember a few years ago, I think Herschel has mentioned this testimony before, but quite a few years ago, he had his camera bag stolen, and it was stolen out of a very open place, but it was so sad. It was quite a lot of money. It was a camera in the bag and lenses, etc. And we were so down. It was like, how could this ever happen? We had a wedding that was coming up in the next 2 months that we needed to shoot for, and you feel like you're devastated. What are you going to do about it? And we attended a worship service that evening after that happened, and we were feeling so down and so discouraged by it. But being a part of that worship service just made us feel better. It encouraged us. It made us realize that God is bigger than just a mere camera bag with 100,000 rand in it. He's big. He's much bigger than that. And we felt so encouraged. And like I'm saying, worship services are important. Corporate services are important. But what I do want to say that it cannot start there and it cannot stop there. Everything we do should be an act of worship. Even when we're talking to people or interacting with our colleagues or our family members or our friends, we should always be representing Christ. So I just want to go back to that verse that I said, read earlier, and we're just going to focus on the one which is John 4 verse 23. It says, "Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks." So this is what God is saying. He is looking for true worshippers. What are true worshippers? True worshippers are those who worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Now, man has put many restrictions on worshiping God. For instance, the worship team must wear certain things. You have to have certain clothes on. There was a specific church that worship team had to wear high heels when they're on the stage. You couldn't wear flats. There must be a band. Some churches they say there must be a choir. Some churches believe that you must lift up your hands. Some say you must not lift up your hands. And so there's all these restrictions that man has put on on worshiping God. But what does the Bible say? It says we must worship in spirit and in truth. In spirit, it means it's a spiritual activity. First of all, we must be born again. We have to be part of the kingdom of God because we cannot worship a God that we don't know. God is a spirit. He obviously doesn't have a physical body. So it means that we can worship wherever and whenever because He is spirit. He is not in one place. He is what we call omnipresent. He is everywhere all the time. So therefore, the place of worship is irrelevant. It doesn't matter where you worship. The fact is that you must worship. So in the days of Moses and the Israelites, they used to have a physical box, which they used to call the ark of God. And God was inside this ark, so they used to carry it everywhere, and eventually it went into a temple, which is a physical thing, and there was a ritual around, not a ritual, but they had to light certain candles, they had to do certain things, they had to say certain things when they are wanting to worship. They had to wash their hands. They couldn't touch it without. They sacrificed animals. There was a lot of physical things that were done those days. But then Jesus came. And Jesus came and He broke down all those religious activities, all those regulations, and He called us to be true worshippers, people who worship in spirit and in truth. Where it is just us and it's Him. That's all. And when we worship, it must be with our whole heart engaged. In Romans 12 verse 1, it says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship." So we should worship with everything. We should worship with our lifestyles. When we sing, we are thinking about God, about His nature, not about how we look. How does it look how do I sound when I sing? Or to those around me, when I raise my hand, do I look like I'm being real, or whatever the case is? No, it's got to be all about God and not about us. When we talk, we must be mindful of God's nature, of Christ's nature. In everything that we do, we must worship the Lord. He also says we must worship in truth, in spirit and in truth. So our hearts must be sincere. We must be real. There's no use doing it and you don't mean it. There's no use having all the outward appearance and inside of your hearts, you're not even thinking about the Lord when you're worshiping. You have to mean it. It must be real. It must be intentional. And it has to be according to the word of God. It is all about Jesus Christ. He is the basis of our faith. He is the reason that we your worship and my worship is to an audience of one. It's not about your family. It's not about the church. It's not about anybody else but our God. And all that matters is our God. So we mustn't allow ourselves to be distracted, because we can be distracted by many things. But ultimately, it's all about Jesus. Jesus is the one who matters. John Piper, I just want to read something that he had said. "Together in spirit and truth mean that real worship comes from the spirit within and is based on true views of our God. Worship must have heart and worship must have head. Worship must engage your emotions and worship must engage your thoughts." So everything about us should be fixated on this God, and that our lives should be all about worshiping our God. Lastly, I would like to just encourage us as adults, as parents, to influence and teach our children, the people that we have influence over, the younger generation, to look to Jesus, to point them to Jesus, to let them be aware that discouragement will come, resentment will come, stressful situations will come, disappointments will come, worry and anxiety, but they must look to Jesus for help. And there's no better way than worshiping God and creating a culture of worship in our homes and in our families. I listened to a story about a family. It was a 12-year-old boy, and obviously he had a sister, he had parents, with this lockdown situation, obviously the kids are not going to school. Well, at least social distancing, kids are not going to school. So they're not getting PE, they're not getting to do the activities they normally do. They're not getting to release all the energy they have, etc. So you would play games, they would do things as families, etc. Obviously, you would have anger. I think he was playing a game and he hit the TV and the monitor broke and things like that. So they work through all those things. They would do things as family, as I said. And one day the grandfather visited because he needed to help them fix something. He left to go. The mother was going to go fetch somebody. And the father went outside to take a call. Said it took about 30 minutes. His daughter came running, was 7 years old, and said, Daddy, Hayden has hung himself. And I just thought, how devastating. As a family, you're together, you're doing things together, but inwardly our kids are fighting real battles. Not going to school, it's a big thing for them. They don't get to release. They getting influenced by media. They're getting influenced by these games that they're playing, or the social media that they're involved in. And we've got to keeping tabs on our kids, pointing them to Jesus all the time, teaching our kids to choose Jesus, and that nothing is too big for our God, and that there's never reason for them to give up. So I just want to encourage us to continue to be true worshippers. Let us and our children be true worshippers, a people, a generation that worships God in spirit and in truth. So we're just going to pray. Like I said, that in order to worship God in spirit and truth, you have to be born again. You have to be part of God's kingdom. And if there's anybody that would like to give their hearts to the Lord now, I'd like to lead you in a prayer, and then we'll pray for everybody.